Hi, welcome. Did you know that a Warlock Paladin can attack up to 9 times in a single turn? Did you know that a Sorcerer Fighter can cast 4 spells in a single turn? Or do you know the limit of how many summons you can have in a party? Well, with a game as big and complex as Baldur's Gate 3, I'm here to give you some additional tips and tricks, 14 to be exact, to help you make the most out of every resource in your journey and understand some mechanics a bit better. Let's start it off. The first thing is that you should always go into combat prepared. Remember that the game is always working on a turn-based system, even if you are not in combat. That means that if you apply a buff before going into combat, and most buffs that are from spells in this game are approximately 10 turns long, you will be using the buff, and then once you enter combat, you will still have 9 turns of that buff remaining. This means it's a perfect opportunity to cast defensive buffs or flight or haste and then walk into combat if you already know that there is going to be a combat encounter. Sure, you lose out on 1 or 2 turns of the buff, but you also don't waste those turns in combat activating them. Speaking of going in prepared, most summons stay with you until long rest. Others have a turn limit, but many of them do not. And you can just summon them right off the bat after every long rest and carry them with you forever. Some of them have some problems. Elementals specifically have given me a lot of issues with other NPCs, and you sometimes have to just put them away, just like leave them in rooms behind, or NPCs won't trigger things, they'll chase you around, but like, you can't be here, what is that? Similar to how NPCs react to wild shape, but most are fine. So just make a mental note of having your summons out before you go into combat. So here's an interesting question that requires some extensive testing. How many summons can you have out? Well, the answer is as many as you want. The condition is that if a summon comes from the same spell or from the same origin point, the same source if you will, and you use it again, it will eliminate the previous summon that was out. So if you have Conjure Elementals, the level 5 spell, and you conjure a Fire Elemental, and then you conjure an air elemental, the fire elemental will disappear. But as long as they come from different spells, I can't find a limit. I tested this by becoming a Circle of the Moon Druid and Beastmaster Ranger, and I used an item that let me summon a Cambion. I summoned an Elemental, I summoned a Minor Elemental, which are actually 2 companions. I summoned a Woodland Dryad and its Woad. I summoned the Beastmaster Companion and used Find Familiar for a total of 7 summons, not counting my own character. And the game not only had no problem with this, but it didn't have a problem when I did this on all 4 of my characters and ran around with a party of 32. So go wild if you really want to get an advantage in combat and go in prepared. I guess going in with 32 characters is a good way of being prepared. However, I am not responsible for your frame rate. Speaking of all of these things with spells, some quick tips are, remember that you can switch out your prepared spells, your equipped spells if you will, by pressing K at any time outside of combat. So if you, for example, like me, needed to remove a curse real quick and forgot that you even had it, it's good to press K on the casters that use prepared spells. You're like, oh look, I have remove curse. I equipped it a quick moment, used it, and then unequipped it back to my typical loadout. It's also good to just check from time to time. Maybe you skipped on a spell, you didn't pay a lot of attention, and you have something that would just be magnificent for a specific situation. Another simple tip is that if you hold control, you can attack the environment. You can interact with the environment by attacking it. This is perfect for opening doors and chests, especially once you have the strength or the weapons to do so. And remember to hold down left Alt so that you highlight all of the loot in the chest instead of just looking at the debris. Don't underestimate status effects. Sure, there's things like bleed and poison, which are the typical damage ones, but those aren't the ones I'm talking about. I'm talking about things like blind and fear and charm and hold and stun. During my first playthrough, stun locking 2 people consistently with my monk, including whoever was the priority target, was an incredibly cheesy and easy way to win most fights, just because stunning somebody that is really strong is that powerful. But there are plenty of other use cases, including hold being particularly strong, silence being very strong, and other spells that act similarly to silence, fears, slows, all of these things can win you fights very easily. And trust me, these spells will get you through some tough times. But more importantly, especially once we talk more about gear, remember that the power of these status effects will often outweigh 2 or 3 points of potential damage on a weapon or a couple of points on your armor class. It will almost always be worth it to leave a couple of points of damage on your gear if, for example, a weapon has a chance to inflict fear on hit or blind on hit or any other status effect. Don't let yourself be fooled by the high numbers. These things are really strong. Hopefully you've already noticed or seen in a previous video that you can carry 4 charges of inspiration to re-roll checks. But it's worth remembering that very often failing a check doesn't mean that it's gone. Sure, in critical dialogue situations, yes, but a lot of environmental things like trying to resolve a puzzle or a check on Arcana or history on an object, you can fail it with a character and then just switch to a different character and try again. Not only that, but if you failed with every character, you could even go back to camp, bring another character and have them try. It's also worth it to keep in mind that your characters probably have different proficiencies and might be better suited to these checks than others. There are a couple of environmental checks in the game that function like this, where you can only do it once per character, and if you forgot to save or something like that and screwed up, you can go back to camp, bring someone else, and maybe this time don't forget to save. I'm speaking from my own experience of being very dumb. Illithid powers, which you maybe have, are very powerful, especially as they scale into the late game. They are game changers in some cases. Remember that to upgrade your Illithid powers, you're going to need to collect tadpoles, and these will often show up in side areas, side quests, or if you defeat any other chosen. Each tree for Illithid powers is different on every companion. You're gonna have to spread them out however you want. You could focus on a couple of characters more than others. You could just get everything on your main character, or you could go down specific trees for each of them. But even though they are completely optional, if you decide to go for them, don't ignore them. They have some incredible synergies and just very, very powerful things. When it comes to endgame, loot is what really matters. Heck, even before endgame, there's a lot of incredibly powerful loot. You see, you will reach level 12, the game's level cap, before the end of the game. Even if you're just being a little bit thorough, you will reach it well before the end of the game, and you'll do plenty of fighting where you gain absolutely no experience. What really pushes your builds into absurdity is not only things like the Illithid powers I mentioned before, but especially your loot. A lot of the strongest loot comes from side quests, sometimes from your companion side quests or just other hidden things. And more often than not, in BG3, if it feels like there should be a big reward at the end of it, it will be. And if you read the description and you don't think it's a big reward, check again. Some items' powers are kind of deceiving. An easy example of this is the Blood of Lathander, which is a legendary mace that you can obtain technically in Act 1. It comes with an instant revive once per long rest, a passive that blinds enemies that are near to you, and the ability to cast Sunbeam, a level 6 evocation spell once per long rest. All of that just on your weapon. Imagine how crazy things get at the end game when your full party is kitted out in items that are equally as powerful but on every possible slot. Pay attention to shops. Always visit shops and read carefully what the gear is to see if it synergizes with what you're trying to build, and always keep an eye out for good loot. Read all of the descriptions carefully. There is some busted stuff out there. It goes beyond just what the numbers say. And if there's something crazy that you want to do to break the game, there's probably a piece of loot that's going to allow you to do it. So multiclassing is not a requirement, but it is very useful. You should know this before you decide to multiclass. First, you can multiclass at any level, and you can always go back and respec for 100 gold at Withers. At level 1, you can reallocate your stats, but your starting class will determine your proficiencies. So for example, taking a Warlock Paladin, if you start as a Paladin, you will get heavy armor proficiency, but if you start as a Warlock, you won't. And when you multi-class and get levels in Paladin, you will only get medium armor proficiency. Carefully read what you get for starting as that class and what you would gain from multiclassing into it to round out your build and get what you want the most. Now, as I said, it's completely fine to stay as the same class all the way up until level 12. There are some classes that are better for doing that than others, specifically Fighter, Druid, Warlock, and Sorcerer, in my opinion, benefit from this, although all casters benefit from getting access to their highest level spells, of course. This doesn't mean that if you're playing a different class, you shouldn't go to 12, but it might be worth looking into what are the most popular or the most cool multi-classes that you can do with your preferred class, just in case you want to get the most out of them or some cool combos, or I would say do it for fun because, as I said before, you're going to be overpowered because of your loot no matter what you chose at the end of the game. So do it because you think it's cool more than because you think it's a necessity. These are some more advanced tips talking about mechanics in the game. I'm going to explain them here, but I'm also going to have a video up later on showing builds that specifically take advantage of these. So the first question is, how many times can I attack? The answer to that question is 3 times in one normal turn. So this excludes things like Action Surge and Haste. You reach that 3 attack limit one of 3 ways. The first one is by taking a fighter all the way to level 11, which will give you improved extra attack. Martial classes get extra attack at level 5, and then that's that. But fighters get improved extra attack at level 11, allowing them to attack 3 times. The other is to be a druid and reach level 10, where you will gain improved wild strike. Same thing, but only when you're wild shaped. The third one is to be a Pact of the Blade warlock. And once you get the extra attack on your pact weapon, that does indeed stack with extra attack from any martial class that you want, allowing you to attack 3 times. So if you want to attack 3 times, that's how you reach it. But what if you wanted to attack 6 times or 9 times? Well, those are things that you can do. So let's talk about 2 of the strongest buffs in the game. The first one is Action Surge. You get this for being a fighter at level 2. Once per short rest, you can activate this to gain an extra action. This works identical to your first action, so if you can attack 3 times with your main action, this extra action will let you attack 3 times. This means you now attack 6 times, or whatever else you want to do, but you get my point. The other one is with Haste. Haste is an incredibly busted spell. As a buff, it's absurd. You can get it from a bunch of different sources, so potions, for example, a potion of speed will grant you haste for 3 turns, but the spell as a baseline will give you 10 turns of haste. While you are hastened, you have 2 actions per turn, every turn that haste is active, as well as increased movement speed, which is just, move distance, and a bonus to your armor class. And yes, if you wanted to, this does stack with Action Surge. So if you are somebody capable of doing 3 attacks in one action, and you are also hastened, and you also Action Surge, as you can see on screen, you can 100% stab something 9 times in a row. Haste as a buff is incredibly broken. It's a staple in D&D, and they just made it even stronger in BG3. So if you want to make the game easy mode, just always have haste applied. An easy way is to use a sorcerer and then use the twinned meta magic so that you can apply it to yourself and another character in one cast. And like we said before, apply it just before combat so you can go in and destroy things. Now you can use the same combination to cast as many spells as possible. If you had haste and you multi-class to get Action Surge and you were a caster, you could cast 3 very powerful spells all in one turn. Not only that, but with the help of items, those can be even more casts, or you can even reduce the resources like your spell slots for casting those spells. And if you specifically went Sorcerer and have access to Quick Spell or one of the items that gives you Quick Spell, which lets you use a spell as your bonus action, you could cast it 4 times, and I'm quite sure, but I haven't tested it yet, that you can reach 5. Now that's funny. Using Chain Lightning 5 times in one turn is funny. But when it comes to just being practical, things like reducing the spell slot cost or regenerating spell slots on a class that can be hastened constantly so that you're throwing out 2 very powerful spells per turn and you're not necessarily forced into long resting all of the time, like specific legendary staff I'm using in this footage that you obtain in Baldur's Gate that gives you access to 2 elemental high-powered spells, but they don't cost spell slots, they just refresh on short rest, is a tremendous build. It's like a really easy way to just steamroll the third act of the game if you wanted to. But that's not the point of what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about here is more that you understand haste, action surge, and how things stack and interact with each other. Like I said, I will go more in depth with specific builds and items in a video coming up, so make sure to subscribe for that. This is a really short tip. I'm sure most people know that by throwing a potion into a group, you can all get the buff, but items are very useful in combat as well. Throwing items and applying items, all of it is very useful. If you find yourself in a tight spot, remember to open your inventory because there's a good chance that you have something that will save you or help you in that situation, be it from throwing something damaging or something that is going to inflict a status effect, or applying poisons, or even just a spell that you can use from a scroll. This tip is here very close to the end because I really did want to explain some of the other things. First, you should abuse short rests as much as possible. It's normal that you don't want to long rest all the time. You might be worried about your supplies. Don't worry, as you keep going into the game, eventually the supply limitation of your long rest will kind of just be lifted. But what I want you to think about is that even in the early game, if something refreshes on short rest, you should probably use it every fight. If something looks incredibly easy, like you're just going to melee 2 opponents down, then maybe not. But otherwise, if a fight looks like it's going to cost resources of any kind, you should be using everything that refreshes on short rest as quickly as you can. Maybe all of your things that refresh on short rest, which might be more than you realize, is enough to take down the fight without using any of your more expensive resources, let's say the ones that require long rests. And if you use the ones that required short rest and long rest at the end of the day, then it didn't matter. You were going to refresh everything anyways. But if you didn't use the expensive resources, now all you need is to spend a short rest instead of your actual supplies to have all of that topped up for the next fight. Or even if you did use expensive resources, maybe with the resources that you'll refresh from just a short rest will be enough for a smaller encounter up ahead. The point is, there's a lot of really strong things that replenish on short rest, and it's very valuable to have them around and accounted for so that you use them as much as possible. They will make your combat encounters more diverse, more fun, make you feel more powerful, and probably make them a little bit easier. As a quick mention of things that replenish on short rest, oftentimes a lot of the abilities on your gear, your key slots, your warlock spell slots, your wild shape, your superiority dice as a battle master. There's a lot of things that refresh. Use them, spam them all the time. Keep in mind how useful they can be and how easy it is to get them back before your next fight. And finally, for all the mentions that I've made in this video related to min-maxing, the game really just throws some absurdly powerful things at you, especially towards the end game. It's difficult to not be broken by the end of Baldur's Gate 3. So really play however you want. It's cool to be interested in crazy broken builds and in multiclassing and in how to maximize your efficiency throughout the game, but I don't think you're really gonna need it too much. So just relax and enjoy. Take the opportunity to roleplay a bit, since the game will probably find a way to give you gear and opportunities to make whatever crazy idea you had for a character to not only be viable, but borderline game-breaking by the end of it. The balance of this game, for how difficult certain spikes can be, if you understand everything and you're taking full advantage of it, those spikes are lessened, and as you reach endgame, there is no difficulty anymore. I mean, really, there's some metagaming. I don't want this character to die during this fight. Okay, that's an extra challenge, but it's really hard to not win all the time. So just have fun with it. Because even on Tactician, I'm on a Tactician playthrough at the moment, I feel like the difficulty curve is pretty much the same. It just requires more knowledge and be more efficient on everything that I use. So just don't worry about it. Really, the difficulty of this game is more suited for something else.
Challenge runs.
What was that? You guys hear that? What was that ethereal voice that sounded a lot like my own? What a strange thing to hear, huh? So make sure to tune into my other videos if you're interested. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see that more in-depth explanation with the multiclassing builds coming up, as well as very soon I will be testing my own personal limits when it comes to insanity in BG3, along with coverage for all of the other great games coming out. I want to thank you all so much for the support so far. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, leave a comment with your merry buff kill for Shadowheart Karlach Lae'zel, and that way we can have the people who didn't reach the end of the video very confused as to what's going on down there. Again, thank you for the support. I've been Muck Thief. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the internet.